but please help me welcome Sister Maureen Caro.
Thank you.
You are welcome to Praise Talk Show, Sister Maureen. You founded an organization called Right Impressions.
That's correct. Yeah.
And you have been doing quite a bit with churches.
That's right.
In different areas. I believe in consulting with them and helping them with their management. But there is a particular topic that you always run workshops.
That's right. I do some training on that.
On training, and I believe it's something that's very vital to all of us, especially us as parents.
That's right.
So I'm going to put myself in that category. That, some things we know, some things we don't know.
Sure.
I often say to people that who sends anyone to a parent school, to say,
no, you learn on the job.
This is how you do it. This is how you're meant to do it.
You learn on the job.
You learn on the job. And, today is just one of those days that we are going to be able to be equipped, with what you're going to be sharing with us on child protection. Well, Sister Maureen, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Okay, so I'll just talk about how Right Impressions came to be.
Yeah.
Right Impressions actually came out of my burden for the society at large to have the right impression about what the church really is.
Okay.
In the 80s especially, when Christianity began to really take root in Britain, people thought that it was a sect because they established churches.
Pentecostalism, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
When we're talking about Pentecostalism,
okay.
yeah.
Okay.
And
is
at
that a
the
word?
time,
Is that a word?
well, you talk about you talk about the Pentecostal movement.
Yes, right. Okay.
So the established churches were, the Catholic and then the Anglican churches. And then anything outside that was foreign.
Yeah.
And so when you stand up to preach in the buses and everything, people look at you and go, where's she coming from?
Crazy.
Exactly. So that's how Right Impressions came to be, really.
Okay.
It's to bridge that gap between us and the society and enabling people to understand where, what true Christianity is, really. And then from there on, working with churches to see, because it's okay for us to say we want the society to understand us. What about us? What are the messages that we're putting out there?
Sure.
Maybe we are causing the misconception in the first instance.
That's true.
So now working with churches, helping them to put the right face out there in the society so that people would know the true, have a true understanding of who the church is or what the church is. And then with that, there's an open communication.
Right.
So that's how Right Impressions came to be.
I think somebody's going to be saying, okay, I need to dial that number right now. Speak to this lady to see how she can help us.
Yeah.
Sister Maureen, some details will be on the screen for you to be able to contact her at some point in time in this interview. Now, so one of your main focus is child protection.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So somebody hears that word or that topic, child protection. What is child protection about?
Okay, child protection really is as what it said, which is about protecting our children.
Right.
There's been a few scandals in the church. I don't know if you've been, like in the newspaper.
Okay.
I've been working in the charity sector for over 15 years now.
Okay.
And I remember the first time that there was a news in the Third Sector magazine, which is for the voluntary sector. And there was this man who they found out that he was a pedophile. The church had opened its doors. And, like we are, we're very trusting, we're very loving. And we don't ask too many details, too many questions. If somebody comes up, I want to volunteer, we're very happy because the main part of our workforce is voluntary.
Right.
Volunteers. Volunteers come in and, we welcome them with open arms. And so when I saw that, something rose up inside of me, again, talking about Right Impressions. And I'm like, what's the kind of message that we're sending out? That we're not, looking at these people, scrutinizing maybe their CVs or where they come from. And just because we're Christians, just because we're trusting people, doesn't mean we should be dumb. So it's really, the way I came into child protection is trying to help churches to wake up to the fact that we're only doing ourselves a disservice if we don't sit down and scrutinize people before they come in.
Right.
So I started doing training in that area.
And that is coming in from volunteers' point of view,
That's
not
correct.
as members.
No.
Okay, because it's just for us to be able to clarify
Exactly.
that. So somebody is in your church, it's fine, they can go. But at the moment they want to start volunteering for that ministry, we need to have certain checks in place.
That's correct.
Okay, yeah.
Okay. So that's where the burden started from.
Right.
And then, you know, working with people who are volunteers. Because when you look at it, I mean, everybody in church, we all belong to one department or the other.
Yes.
At the end of the day, we're all volunteers.
That's
you know,
true.
I volunteer to work as an usher. I volunteer to work with the children.
Yeah.
I volunteer to do the recording in church. Now, in that situation, we're all exposed to vulnerable people.
That's true.
Most especially children.
Yeah.
And I think I've mentioned it to you before, especially from the African background where our children are taught to respect adults. It's very difficult for our children to say no to somebody who they see as an uncle or an aunt.
Right.
And so when that situation, we need to really train our children as well as the volunteers to let them know what the boundaries are.
Right.
Because we live in a very sick world. You know, you know, the church is a dry cleaning place, if I could say.
Yeah.
Everybody coming into church is not saved.
Oh no, that definitely.
You know, and
yeah.
we do, and sometimes we make it ourselves to think that maybe, you know, everybody's here,
It's a
we're all
safe
clapping, we're all
environment.
happy, and we think, oh yeah, you know, it is a safe environment. It is not. Because we are opening our doors to people who are not saved as well as people who are saved. And I'm not saying that you couldn't have Christians as well who could be abusers. I'm just saying that we are under that misconception sometimes that, you know, we're in church and everything is safe. But unfortunately, that's not the truth.
Yes.
And that's where the training comes in, where we need to educate people. If you're going to leave your child into somebody's care, you have an accountability, you have a responsibility towards making sure that your child is safe.
Yeah.
And the church as an organization has the responsibility to make sure they create a safe environment for vulnerable people to feel safe.
Yeah.
So it's a two-way thing. You know, we educate our children so they see the signals, they see the signs, and they know how to respond to those signs and the signals, as well as the church putting in the checks and balances so that when somebody steps out of the boundary, we're able to nip it in the bud, not allow it to fester, and then it grows into a whole thing. And
because, I mean, that is as a result of not dealing with things
That's
like that. That's why we see or hear things on the news, people making reports 20 years down the line, 50 years down the line.
Exactly.
And you're thinking to yourself, so wasn't there anyone you could have spoken to when it happened?
That's right.
Or how have you been able to live with such an experience, you know, for the last 20 years?
Exactly.
For you to finally bring it out.
That's right. And that's why, if I can just come in quickly, part of the child protection training that we do is also letting the church know that they need to have at least 2 people who are responsible to make sure that they are the contact people in that church.
Okay.
So say, for instance, there's a situation where a child felt unsafe.
Right.
The church should have designated people that the children can go to. It's very vital. So you're not just saying, oh, you know, everybody's trained, fine. But there needs to be some recognized individual or individuals that children can actually go to say, this has happened to me. That's very vital. So it's not just having that policy and putting it in a glass and saying, oh, you know, we've gone through the training, we've got the certificate to show for it. You also need to put the system in place to ensure.
I'm glad you've just said this, because this is like dealing with a particular issue here. Because most of the times, if something inappropriate happens, the child would tell the parent, probably when they're at home, probably when they're a lot more relaxed, and then it comes out.
Yeah.
And then the parent becomes very angry. And the next thing is to lash at someone at the church.
Exactly.
And, you know, the pastor or whoever the reports to. And when it comes out at that place, sometimes what people tend to do then is to protect that individual first.
That's right.
Instead of listening to what that child or that young person has to say. And then looking at, okay, let us investigate and then come back to you, you know. And if that child had somebody within the church environment that they could, you know, approach, I said, when anything happens, they will be able to speak to that person first, even before they get home.
Exactly.
Wow. I mean, this is something that we need to, you know, really look more into.
That's right.
But now, looking at child protection and the background of where you've come from, why you have an interest in that area. There's actually a law about it in the land.
That's correct.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about that area.
Okay, so 1889 was the first Act of Parliament for the prevention of cruelty to children.
Okay.
And then in 1894, the Act was amended and extended, and this time it allows children to give evidence in court.
Okay.
So before, the law protected them, but they couldn't give evidence in court. Okay, so now it's progressing. And then in 1908, the Children's Act established juvenile courts and introduced the registration of foster parents. Now, so what happened was, at first it only covered the home environment. So children could say, okay, my parents abused me, blah, blah, blah. But then it didn't put into account how about how foster parents dealt with children. So, in 1908, it also included foster parents being accountable for how they treat their children. Then in 1932, the Children and Young Persons Act broadened the powers of the juvenile court and introduced supervision orders for children at risk.
Right.
So going down, 1948, the Children's Act, 1948, established a children's committee and a children's officer in each local authority. And this followed after the death of a 13-year-old boy called Dennis O'Neill at the hands of his foster parents.
Wow.
Yes.
And there have been other incidences.
Exactly. I mean, we can go on and on, but that's kind of like the background of child protection policy in this country, or should I say the law. And since then, we've seen with the Clean Blier thing, you know, occurring, where the aunt and her boyfriend, you know, put her in and it's such a shame because they were supposed to be Christians. The story was it was an exorcism. They were casting out evil spirits, so they say. Right. So you can see where it brings in the church now. And that's why even now, as someone who works with churches, registering churches, one of the key things that the Charity Commission is on about is, have you put policies in place to safeguard children? You know, you would have thought, I mean, gone are the days where when you're in church, it's the safest place ever for someone to be. But unfortunately, that's not the case anymore.
Okay. There are other things that are going on in my mind, but I'm just going to put a holder to them.
Okay.
So that we can look at the foundation of the family. Where does the foundation of the family play a part in child protection?
Well, from my experience, I remember when my husband and I had our child, the first one, we said to ourselves that we want to create a safe environment. We want to be the kind of parents that their children can come to easily and unburden their heart. That no matter what they've done or what they've seen or what they heard, we wanted to create that place for them to feel safe enough and brave enough to come to us and say, oh, Mom, this is what happened. Oh, Dad, this is what happened. Now, what am I trying to bring here? What I'm trying to say is, as parents, we have a responsibility to look after our children and to create that safe environment. Right. When looking at the history of child protection, it all started in the home. Unfortunately, the home is supposed to be the safest place for a child, but we discover that it's not usually the case, or it's not sometimes the case.
Okay. And there's still that tussle even now with social services when they want to take children away. And people say, oh, you know, children is best placed with their parents. But what if it's the parent that is the abuser? Right. So going back to your question, it is a fundamental thing. And really, I mean, when we look at God, the only place where he allows children is to be in the family. Yeah. He says Adam and Eve should come together and procreate and give birth to children. So when you look at it, that's God's plan. Yeah. He wants us to be parents, just like he's our Heavenly Father. He's the parent. He's creating safe environments for us. You know, we live in an imperfect world, but he's there guiding us. He's giving us the Holy Spirit to lead us and guide us into all truth. That's creating a safe environment. And we're supposed to be like our Father, do the same thing, giving them the guidance, you know, protecting them. I mean, the Lord is my shepherd. I mean, that is a wonderful psalm on protection. Yeah. And it's the same thing. So in the family, children should be safe within their homes.
Definitely. Yeah. Now, I know somebody's saying, these people, you know, where does discipline come into it? Can we just handle that before we go any
Exactly.
further? Where does discipline come into all of this?
Actually, I was going to say, you know, when we were talking about, you know, the history of child protection, and I was going to say, but then what is abuse? Yeah. There is a cultural connotation when it comes to this. Yeah. Now, I was born here in England, but by Nigerian parents who believe very much in discipline. Okay. Now, we're 8 children. I didn't get smacked, but I know my brothers got smacked and my sisters got smacked. Okay. I think I got smart. And I thought,
smart, not smacked. I like that.
I think I got smart enough not to be smacked like my siblings.
I like it.
You know, and so I have 3 older brothers ahead of me. And so I quickly learned how to please my parents.
I behave myself.
If I didn't want the same thing happening. Okay. So when you talk about abuse, I'm afraid to say that there's a cultural connotation to it. Yeah. Because I'm a parent and I do discipline my children. Okay. Now we live in a society, you know, that does not allow us to discipline our children the way we seem fit. Now we're told we're not allowed to smack our children. Okay. And so if you smack your children, that would be seen as abuse. Okay. So coming down to us as African parents, where do we draw the line? It's a very tricky issue. And now on media, I can't say I smack my children.
Okay, she can't say it.
But I think there are, what should I say? There are
measures.
You know, measures, or, you know, there are things that you can do that you definitely know this is going beyond the boundary.
Oh, okay. All right.
Do you see what I mean?
From the discipline side.
Exactly.
Right, okay.
So even when you're disciplining your child, I think the first thing is when you want to reprimand, even scold your children, are you doing it from an anger?
This is what
point. Or you're doing it after you've set, you know, like when my children do something, I have schooled myself to say to myself, look at this from a different perspective, or count to 10. And then, you know, one thing that I've said to myself is my children they don't have the responsibility for my reputation. Right. Now, a lot of times when we as parents act on our children, sometimes it's from the point of view of my reputation is at stake.
Okay.
You know, that's why we tell our children, remember my parents used to tell me, remember the family from where you come from. Okay. So I have a responsibility of the family name.
So it's a pride thing.
Exactly.
And it's not from the point of, child, this is not good for you
Exactly. So sometimes we need to check ourselves.
Right.
Or is it from fear? Okay. Sometimes we're scared. You know, you're thinking, if I don't do something now, this child is going to end up in prison.
Okay. Okay.
So it could be from fear. Okay. So when you're disciplining your child, you need to ask yourself, where is this coming from? Right. Is it because it's corrective for the child? Remember, the Bible also says that you have earthly parents who smack you or who reprimand you, who scold you out of the flesh. Yeah. But when I correct you, it's for your own good. So sometimes, as parents, when your children act up in the store, what's the first thought that comes to your mind?
She's embarrassing me.
Exactly.
Okay.
And so when you're correcting, it's because, I'm so embarrassed. Everybody's going to think I'm a bad parent. So I love that advert. I'm not sure if it was Asda or something, where the mom as well went on the floor. There's this advert on the table. And she said, oh, you think you can act out?
Right.
I can do the same.
Right.
That mother didn't think, oh, she's embarrassing me.
Right.
She's like, okay, two can play at the game.
Right.
All right. Okay, so I don't want to give you. I'm going to act out as well. So I think sometimes the reason why we discipline so hard or maybe out of place is because there's a lot about us and very little about the child. Because when discipline is about the child, to be honest with you, sometimes you're not as hard. Like sometimes when my children do something, my husband and I ask ourselves, what do you think we should do about this?
Okay.
Do you see what I mean? And we try to reason out that, okay, where is that behavior coming from? All right? Sometimes we've discovered it's because he was scared. Now, it's no excuse. If he was supposed to take 3 smacks, then maybe he would take 1.
No, you don't smack. Okay.
Right, we're not supposed to smack.
No, but I understand what you're saying.
Do you understand? So sometimes,
Right.
where does that discipline, where is it springing from? Is it because you're scared? Is it because you're angry about you and not about the child?
Right.
You know, don't drag my name in the mud. But what about that child?
So from what you're saying, and we were talking about this just before on the background, that it's very important that we create good communication with our children.
That's right.
Okay, because what happens, I mean, for me and my 2, I remember when my Precious was a baby and I was speaking, somebody would turn around and look at me like, is that you're speaking to a baby? You know, I'd have an adult conversation with her, and the benefit of that is that she spoke very quickly, but we reasoning out things quite a lot with, so why did you do that? And why do you think you should do that? Or what do you think would happen when that is done?
Exactly.
You know, and but the point is, I'm trying to bring, is that when we have conversations with children and make discipline a lifestyle, when I mean discipline, not as in constantly going over them and talking down at them, but reasoning a lifestyle, because it's all part of discipline.
Yeah.
You know, it helps them to get your values into their minds.
That's right.
You know, so that when it does matter, as we were saying, they would remember what mom has said or what dad had said or the conversation that we had. But we tend to discipline when something happens. And to be honest, at that time, I was having a conversation with somebody just over last weekend. I said, most of the time when we discipline our children, we call it, or when we smack them, we do it out of anger.
That's the thing.
And it should never be done out of anger. It should be done out of correction for the child. If you do this, this is what would happen. Children, I said to my children, I said, children who do this, they end up like this as teenagers.
Exactly.
And then my son will say, I'll say to him, and where do they end up? They end up in prison. Yes, and you don't want to go there. So
it's very important. It's very, I have had to learn this myself, from checking myself, because, when you take parenting as both a responsibility and a gift from God, then you know that ultimately you're accountable to God the way you nurture your children. Yeah. And if our Heavenly Father, how many times in a day do we say sorry to God? And He still pardons us. And that's what breaks my heart. And, when my children say sorry, I don't have the heart to go, ooh, I'm going to smack it, And then I've realized that the relationship you have with your children, it's so important.
Doesn't make them perfect.
Of course
the
not.
relationship
but
doesn't
then we're
mean,
not perfect.
That's right. The relationship doesn't mean that, they can be perfect in Jesus' name.
Amen.
It doesn't mean that.
We're saved, we're being saved, we shall be saved.
Process.
It's a process.
It's a process.
Exactly.
But what would happen is that the way we relate to them at different stages, even if they were to misbehave, my son said to me the other day, Mom, I did this in school, and I was like, so why did you do it? I don't know. I said, I'm sure that something happened, why you did it. And I said, what happened? I was told to go to the wall. Okay, it's been sorted out. And I tend to ask questions and reason out. I'm not a perfect parent, you know, but some things that our culture does not embrace.
Exactly.
You know, and we need to just check ourselves, as you said. What is the emotions that is going through your own mind when you...
There have been a few occasions, I have to confess, that I've had to go to God and say, Lord, I'm sorry. I think I overdid it there. Wow. And I have apologized to my children. Wow. Definitely say to them, Mommy was a bit harsh there, and God has spoken to me, and I'm sorry. What you did was wrong, but I shouldn't have reacted the way I did.
Right.
And so there's that understanding. And when children know that their parents are human beings and not perfect people, like, you know, sometimes we try to, then the likelihood for them to come to you in time of need is greater.
Okay.
But if they see you as this person that is high up there all the time, then they're like, oh, I'm just too way back for me to, you know, meet up with my parents' expectations. Okay. But when they realize that we're all in it together and God is our Father and we're all accountable to Him, then it's easier for children.
That's right. And just one more thing on that's quite interesting is that when you correct your child and you correct them with the right values and in the right way, you would tend to find a child correcting you at some point in time.
Oh, yes.
Shot. And
oh, definitely.
Very interesting thing that you would find in our culture then is when people say, don't tell me that.
Exactly.
But you corrected the child at some point, and they've got it in their system that it should never happen.
Oh yeah, mine have told me, Mom, you said we shouldn't tell a lie. That was a lie. And I go, okay, no, that's not a lie. This is what actually happened. You know?
So, you know, it's so important that we have to put certain things in place when it comes to discipline.
That's right.
You know, I really wanted us to also look at conversations that we can have with our children, which would then help them to be able to recognize if inappropriate behaviors are extended to them from adults, even people that are close to them, whether relatives or outsiders. What are the certain conversations that we can have with our children at home, which would then now help them to be able to recognize when inappropriate behaviors are being extended to them?
Okay. I think right from when they're young, I mean, there's the usual don't talk to strangers and all that kind of a thing. And then you have to say, you know, sort of like what really constitutes a stranger.
Yeah. Because they see you talking to a stranger and they go, but you told me not to speak to a stranger.
Exactly. Okay, you know, our parents, our children are that way, you know. So I think once they start school, you know, when they're exposed to the wider community, then we need to begin to, I remember very well when I had to say to my son that, you know, not all big people are nice people. And I think there was an incident that happened in a store. My son and I went to a store, and he walked away from me and he went to the fountain. It was actually Croydon Shopping Centre. And he was, there's this fountain within the shopping center, and he splashed some water, and the water, you know, sort of went on this guy's clothes. Would you believe it? The man actually poured water, you know, cupped water, and actually poured it on my son. This is a grown-up man, cannot be younger than 30 years of age. And I was shocked. I couldn't believe my eyes. And so I had to explain to my children, to my child, my son at the time, that not all big people, we call, you know, adults, big people at the time for his age, are nice people. And I think when we begin to let our children know that you can't always be, again, my first son, he's the kind of huggy type. Right. I mean, he would hug someone in the bus. That's how huggy he is, or he was. And I remember having to say to him, you can't do that. A, not everybody loves it. And B, some people might take advantage of you. So I think when they begin to talk and gravitate towards people, unfortunately, we need to burst the bubble that the world is a safe place. I wouldn't be able to put an age to it because it differs from child to child. Some children as early as 2 you know, kind of like gravitate towards people. Some children keep to themselves.
Okay.
But I think when we begin to introduce them to the wider society, we need to gradually introduce that awareness of safety to our children.
So what is safety to a child? What would you say
Right,
to them?
safety to a child means that, you know, you can say hello, but I don't really allow very close physical contact with people.
Okay.
Just so that we're on the safe side. So I say to them, you can shake someone's hand, you don't have to go and hug them, because my children love hugging people.
Girls and sitting on men's lap.
Yes. Usually, I mean, I don't have a girl, but I remember my sister, my dad used to be like, no, don't sit on anyone's laps. So maybe like from the age of 5, I would not encourage that. Apart from their dad, not even close uncles or whatever. Just so that there is that line of demarcation drawn. So if anything untoward happens, then I would say to her, why did you cross the boundary? Or who crossed the boundary out of the two of you? Okay.
And how would you deal with a situation or advise someone to deal with a situation where she's seen as being an extremist, wherein what she's doing is trying to protect her daughter from extended behaviors?
It's very difficult, but to be honest with you, I as a person would prefer to err towards that side than to be like, you know, allow things. I don't mind being called an extremist because I keep saying it, we live in a very imperfect world. And I don't think, for the safety of my children, I don't mind being marked as an extremist.
Any measures need to be put in place when they go to school with teachers as well? What would
I think it's the same
what
thing.
What are the kind of boundaries that you would say to them?
Well, the thing is, right from when, you know, like I say, when we started going to school and everything, I've always told my children about the importance of everybody's personal space. And I say to them, you know, you have to measure that space. And I give an example of when Daddy's driving. Can you see that we don't nose into other people's cars? There's a safe distance that you keep away from cars. And it's the same thing for people. I need to breathe. You give me some personal space. So I say to them, at least a person should be able to go in between you and the next person. I mean, of course, I know now in the public transport where parked the sardines is very difficult. But I try to let them know that personal space is very important. And that, you know, less physical contact is safer than, you know, rubbing bodies and all that kind of stuff.
Now, if a child has something inappropriate has happened to a child, how would a parent be able to recognize that?
Right, there are telling signs, or you know, that you can quickly pick up. The thing is, nobody knows your child better than you. And so, say for instance, you have a very extrovert child, and then all of a sudden that child is withdrawn. Then you need to think about how to find out what has suddenly happened for that child to be withdrawn. You know, you have a very bubbly, exuberant child, and all of a sudden, you know, that child doesn't want to come near you, it's very withdrawn, looks very sad, unhappy, possibly gazing, then definitely there is something wrong with that child. You have some instances where children, maybe even as old as 13, start to wet the bed.
After an experience?
Exactly. That happens sometimes because it's sort of like a psychological thing where, you know, they just hold themselves to their bed and not get up, and, you know, and it's just a way of them being, you know, trying to cope with the situation. But of course it's not working. So you find things like that, or you find your child maybe was an introvert and now suddenly extroverted. So it could work either way, you know. And so you just notice that there's something about them. They're a bit secretive, you know, and you go near them, oh, mommy, don't touch me. Whereas, you know, you like huggy, family, things like that. You begin to pick up signals that maybe something really isn't all right here. Or maybe you ask about a particular teacher, and that's when you begin to understand. Maybe they liked the teacher before, and then you mention the name of that particular teacher, and they kind of,
and like, what happened? What happened between you and so and so? I thought, the sun set and rose on that person, and that's when you begin to wonder if something was going on. Or sometimes some children start to touch themselves. So that happens. And when I mean touch themselves, like, in the private places. So, you may catch them doing that.
After the experience?
Yeah, that's right, yeah. So some children do that as well. Right. Or some children cut themselves because they're ashamed and they don't want to leave. They become a little bit suicidal. But I think the first thing that can be the telltale sign is when they're withdrawn and when, they kind of prefer their own company to other people, when before they didn't used to be like that.
Okay.
Then you begin to wonder if something hasn't happened to them.
Wow. This is scary. And we really need to be able to protect our young people. But now there's something here which is very worrying when we have our young teenagers dressing up like adults.
I think what they call them now is that we're sexing our children. Is the phrase that you mean like maybe young girls wearing makeup and
the skirt is just a bit under the bum, going to school. And that is not allowing protection over that child, because for me you are exposing them, and you're making them vulnerable to a society that have predators out there. We've had situations even with teachers and students, just because the child is looking 25 when she's only 15.
That's right.
How can parents manage this? Because it is a challenge, because the teenagers don't realize that what the parents are trying to do
is to protect
them. And recently I was having a conversation, and somebody else with two different people actually, and one of them said, "Oh yeah, I used to do that as a teenager." I was like, "Well, really? Okay." But I didn't do that, not because I was like perfect. It's just something that never crossed my own mind.
I was going to say that.
But what I'm saying is, children leaving home looking in one way, going to their friend's house, trying to look another way, change
at least
completely.
Join up with the crowd. If you can't beat them, join them.
Go out and they then put themselves in very difficult positions where, can get them all messed up. And then they come home, they cannot speak to mom because they know that, they kind of like contributed
in harm's way.
How do we deal with that?
It's a very, very tricky and difficult situation, because you have two scenarios here.
Right.
The first scenario is a mom who is very permissive, because some parents don't mind the children wearing those short skirts.
Okay.
Like you said, an adult said, "Oh, I did that when I was young." But when you did that, was that right? And does that mean that your child should do the same?
Right.
So when you have parents who allow that, there's very little you can do.
Well, they would rather say, I'd rather see it happen under my roof than not knowing that it's happening. So how do we balance that?
I think the first thing is, if you have been successful in selling your views, your values to your child from when they were young, the thing is, a lot of us don't wake up to that responsibility until the children are grown.
Okay.
And so then it's very hard to curb them.
Okay.
But if from the word go, you had brought them up in a certain way, even if they're going to veer off, it will always be in their minds that these are my parents' values.
Right.
But in a place where those values were not set from the beginning, and then all of a sudden you wake up and you realize your child is one way, and you now try to instill something, it's not going to work.
So it's never too early to discuss things.
Exactly.
And instill your values in them.
That's right. Like my boys know we don't do sagging in my home.
Okay.
We don't. And I don't buy them those kind of trousers that would do the sagging or whatever. My children understand that, but at the same time, they see their dad. He's their role model. He doesn't sag.
Do you see what I mean? Okay. He buttons up his shirt. He's not a prude, you know, and we're not bringing up our children to be prude, but we're asking them to, you know, be proper.
Yeah.
And, you know, dress appropriately. And I think sometimes we parents wake up to it a bit late. And I have seen examples in church where parents have been lax. And people have tried to come in and it wasn't met with, you know, goodwill, and the child has ended up the way you thought the child would.
Okay. You know what? I don't think we can finish this conversation today, but it is our responsibility to look after our children.
That's right.
There's no question about that. I always say there's not a child, not even you and I, that asked to be born. We did not ask to be born. You know, and so if a parent wants a child, or, you know, has a child, then it's their responsibility to look after them. And there's no rule to parenthood, but it's our responsibility as well to protect our children. And from what you've shared today is the fact that it's never too early to put measures in place, and the measures can come with a face of conversations. The measures can come in the place of, you know, opening different angles where we can talk about different, not when the situation now happens and then you've lost it, child's lost it, everybody's lost it, we don't know what to do, you know. And the Lord,
I am quick to add, there's nothing that God cannot do. He will always come in at any point in time. But the thing is, it's better safe than sorry. And if you start early, then you will save yourself the heartache.
And Sister Maureen is available if you'd love to have a chat with her. Her details are on the screen. And also, if you'd like to invite her to your church or your organization, because this doesn't just apply to the church. If you have an organization, especially with parents that are there, and you know, you see that there's a need for people to be exposed to what is happening out there and how we can relate to your children, create a safe environment, you can contact her and she'll be very happy to speak to you. You know, one last thing I need to say is that if a parent does not take responsibility, the government would.
That's right.
And when they come into place, you wouldn't like it.
No, not at all.
No parent likes
it. And
it
it doesn't really end up well with the children. I mean, when you look at the rate of what happens to children after they leave care, it's frightening. And so you don't want your children to go down that route.
No. So we need to, you know, find ourselves, put ourselves in position. I mean, especially when you're dealing with teenagers, you'll never be the good parent.
Oh, definitely
you know,
not.
When you want to put these things. But later on in life, I mean, I'm still, you know, thanking God for my mom, thanking God for the things that she never stopped talking. One day I said to my mom, "Mom, why are you always talking?" She said, "Because I'm a mother and that's what I'm meant to do."
Exactly.
Like, okay.
And I have memories of putting myself in some situations and hearing my dad's voice and my mom's voice.
You would always hear their voices. You would always hear their voices.
And being grateful.
You know, you want your child to always hear your voice wherever they are, especially when you've built a beautiful relationship with them. It's my prayer that we would all do so and, you know, see the fruit of our labor. Thank you so much,
you're welcome.
for making yourself available